street, scrounge around for inspiration, anything to. Says people God is angry, says friend the end is near. Mama, since we're all gonna burn, let's get down over here. Sometimes it's a shakedown, sometimes it's a smile. Sometimes you buy a bottle, walk a while. What are you gonna do when the battle's on? The lines are drawn, someone's got to pay. Don't let him get away. Someone's got to pay.
Hello, everybody. If you could start taking a seat, please. Couple minutes. Got to give everybody a chance to sit down. Good morning. Do we have any folks out in the hall that need to come in? We need to get started on time today because we have a really dynamic speaker and we want to give him plenty of time. So, welcome everybody to Houston Oasis. I am Jennifer Payton. I'm your MC for today. I'm on the board, secretary of the board. I'd like to welcome any visitors that we have this morning. We're really glad you're here, and we hope that you will make us your secular group on Sunday mornings for the future. Also want to welcome all of our regulars. Thank you for being a part of our community. We are not who we are without who you are and what you do, so thank you again. Today we were supposed to have a musician, but she's having car trouble, so yep. But that gives our speaker more time to speak, so that's great. We have a great program today. We have Andy Boyd, who's going to give a little community moment, and then we'll have a break, and then we'll have our main speaker, Nick Fish, and then we'll have another break and then some question and answer period, and then we'll have some announcements, and then also today we have our Bring Your Own Lunch potluck. Don't worry if you're new and you did not bring any lunch. People usually bring plenty, and if you want, you can also order something to be brought here, you know, Uber Eats or whatever, and that can be delivered here if that's what you want. So anyway, so that is our program for today. Let's start with our community moment. Andy Boyd is a longtime member of Houston Oasis. If you recognize his voice, he used to do Engines of Our Ingenuity, so that's why.
Well, good morning, and see if I can get to the right spot here. Okay, I think I'll do it that way. So where this came from was I was watching a movie one night, and this song that I haven't heard in like 4 decades came on, and I thought, I like that song. And it immediately popped into my head this little video project I wanted to do. Am I on? Okay. Okay. So a video project that I wanted to do. Got it. This is the result of that. Originally, I was going to do it with just some quick footage from Starbucks, because my son works there, but they didn't quite figure out what I was doing, as you'll see from the early stuff. So I said, why didn't I think of the Oasis to begin with? So I came down, and if you were here a couple of months ago, I was capturing video footage of all of you, and I had a chance to put it together. I'm not, you'll see the filming is not very good. I'm not very good at capturing footage. I do like to do all the post-production stuff. So with that, let's just go ahead and go 3.5 minutes here. I really had fun because it was good to see all the different smiles and watch you bouncing around to it. So a couple of things I wanted to point out here at the end, just because they were fun for me, was that does anyone here know, I'm sure there are, know who Pete Townsend is? Of course. Okay, even the younger ones, some of the younger ones know it is. So for those of you who don't know, he was guitarist for The Who many years ago. And what was he known for? He had two kind of signature moves that he had. Okay, Richard, smashing guitars, good. Smashing guitars, he did it pretty much once he got into it, he was doing it all the time. And Will's got the other one. You've got to come up and show it to us, though, Will. If you don't do it, I'm going to do it. I'll get Lou to do it. Do you remember the windmill?
What, please?
The windmill. Richard's going to do the windmill for us. There you go. I'm very, very courageous. Does any? If we had our guitarist here, I was going to ask if they demonstrate how to smash the guitar, but. And I'll joke one more time. Does anybody still play leg guitar? Did you ever play leg guitar? And does anybody? Do you play leg guitar? Okay, I would do it. My balance isn't as good. You just stick your leg out like this and play it like a guitar. Leg guitar. Yeah. Let's see. Oh, I was just going to add, if the Beatles were the Mop Tops and the Rolling Stones were the Bad Boys, then the Who was the really angry group. They were angry. And just to have fun, can anybody list some of their songs? Remember? Pinball Wizard, definitely, yeah, which has been covered many times since then, but they wrote it, yeah. Won't get fooled again, that's right. I remember Who Are You, with the lyric, who the heck are you, although it wasn't heck. And that was the first time I'd heard that in a song. I Can See for Miles, Talking About My Generation. Boris the Spider. Okay, in any event, when I first looked for this song, I thought, this can't be the Pete Townsend, because I thought this just isn't him. But that's not his music. But apparently this was from his singles career, and in his later singles career, this was the highest-selling singles record that he did by himself. It reached number 9 on the pop charts. His producer told him not to release it because he thought it would ruin his career, but he did it anyway. And I'll just leave you with a quote because we saw him in a video at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland many years ago. And it was just such a wonderful quote. I couldn't find it again, but I've been quoting it for years and years. Someone asked him if rock and roll had anything to do, if good rock and roll had anything to do with God. And he said, absolutely. He says, all good rock and roll is either about running away from God or running back to God. So with that, if I can show it here, let me see. No, I'm not quite sure. I just wanted to show a picture of Pete Townsend. But there you go. You see the windmill on the right and a little smashing on the left. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun doing it, and thanks for all your smiling faces.
Thank you, Andy. So good to see all the dancing talent in our group. So I want to ask y'all something. We normally have a musician, so normally after the community moment, we have a little break. Do you feel like we need a break, or do we want to go straight to the main talk? What would y'all like to do? Main talk. Okay. Sounds good to me. So our main speaker today is Nick Fish. He is president of American Atheists, and he's going to talk to us about the rise of Christian nationalism and all those kind of things that we're worried about right now. I also just want to mention that Texas pretty much has American Atheists covered because Will is our state director for American Atheists, and then Kelly Rhodes, who's, I'm not sure if she's here yet, she's also a part of American Atheists. So Texas, as usual, kind of making a bigger than normal footprint in some of these organizations. So anyway, let me introduce Nick Fish. Glad to have you. Everybody, please remember to silence your cell phones right now so that we don't have any funny buzzings or rings while he's speaking. Thank you.
Oh, we can leave this on top.
I need that.
Okay. And then
that's for the audio.
jack? Yeah. And actually, I could go underneath. Is this right up here? You sure you don't want it on top?
Yeah, because I don't need it for.
Okay.
All right, good, good. Okay. All right, sorry about that, everybody. We were working on the break and we didn't do an AV check beforehand, so apologies. So I want to just thank everybody for being here and for the hospitality, the incredible hospitality of the folks at Oasis and everybody here in Houston. I had a very lovely dinner with Will last night, and it was really great to see some very familiar faces and some new faces. A couple weeks ago, American Atheists hosted its annual conference in the city of Philadelphia, where I now live. Our conference gave hundreds of atheists and humanists and non-religious people from all across our country, and indeed all across the world, the opportunity to connect with one another on a human level, something that I know is very important to the folks here at Oasis. It was a chance for us to not just connect on that level, but learn about the great work that's happening in our communities, not just from the people on stage, but from the people we interacted with, and about how we're confronting the profound threats being faced by our democracy. I think we're all acutely aware of many of those threats. You here in Texas in particular see many of them every single day. At our national conference in Philadelphia, arguably the birthplace of American democracy, those concerns were certainly elevated in our consciousness. So I want to start with a story. In going back to 1787, when delegates from 12 states, Rhode Island chose not to attend, they arrived in the city of Philadelphia, just a few blocks from where our conference was, to discuss changes to the Articles of Confederation. And while the delegates didn't come to Philadelphia with the idea of drafting an entirely new constitution in their minds, it immediately became clear to them that a simple revision of those Articles of Confederation wouldn't suffice. What they needed to do was do something new, create an entirely new system of government. And so from May to September, that's exactly what they did. On September 17th, the final day of the convention, delegates signed what would be the final proposed version of what would become our Constitution. And as the delegates were leaving that day, and the final version was being prepared for distribution, a woman by the name of Elizabeth Willing Powell, who was a socialite, very important figure within Philadelphia politics, approached Benjamin Franklin. She obviously wasn't allowed in the convention because she was a woman, but everyone knew that the road to power, the road to acceptance, everything sort of ran through Miss Powell. And she said to Ben Franklin, well, what have we got, a republic or a monarchy? And Franklin responded, a republic if you can keep it. And that's what we were gathered in Philadelphia at our conference, and why I'm talking to you today, is to discuss how we keep our republic. How do we, as a community of atheists, agnostics, humanists, united in our shared values, act boldly and collaboratively to protect and rebuild our secular democracy? How do we ensure that our democracy is inclusive, forward-looking, adaptive, and centered around our shared human experience? I think it starts with understanding what we're up against and exactly what's at stake here. We've spent the last 7 or 8 years talking constantly about the threat of white Christian nationalism. I'm sure I'm not the first speaker you've had here at Oasis to talk about it. But what is it? On its most basic level, for anyone who hasn't heard this before, white Christian nationalism is a fusion of beliefs about what it means to be truly American. And the name is sort of obvious. In this vision of Americanness, there are winners and there are losers. There are people who are chosen by God to rule and people who are destined to be ruled. And I'm not telling you anything you didn't already know when I say that white Christian nationalism and its movement seeks nothing less than total domination of our nation. These extremists are often self-appointed guardians of so-called religious liberty, and they believe that they are God's chosen ones. They alone, they believe, have the authority and indeed the mandate to rule. And they seek that dominance over all aspects of American life: family, education, religion, the media, arts and entertainment, business, and government. No sound? No sound. don't have sound. Just a second. Sorry. Let's try that again.
No matter who tries to do what government tries to do what, I'm here to tell you, if the church arises in this hour, the church is about to take this country back. It's about to take the government back. It's about to take the schools back. We're about to take back Hollywood, arts and entertainment, education. I'm telling you, if the church will rise up, this is why God is calling the Esthers in this hour, in this moment, and he's created himself a movement for this time. Are you ready? Because we're not here to patty cake. We're here to take over. Hey, that's what the right wing watch and all these people like to call me. There's a dominion guy. There's a guy that's trying to take everything over. I said, yes, I am, for the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. 2024, we're taking over in the name of Jesus. Because here's my point. If the church organizes, we win. If the church organizes, we win. So it don't matter who tries.
That was Mark Gonzalez, a pastor who is associated with the Dominionist New Apostolic Reformation, speaking at an event here in Houston called Crowned 2024. It's important for us to acknowledge at this point that these sort of rhetoric, and these beliefs, are not limited to just an extreme few. And while it's true that these beliefs certainly don't represent the majority of our fellow Americans, or even a majority of American Christians, there are millions of Americans who hear this rhetoric in their churches or on their computers on YouTube every single Sunday. PRRI, the Public Religion Research Institute, estimates that approximately 10% of Americans are adherents to white Christian nationalism, and another 19% are sympathetic to the ideology. But 29% of Americans reject it outright, an equal number, and another 39% are skeptical. So when we talk about finding ground with people who share our values, namely our commitment to a pluralistic, inclusive, secular democracy, we have to remember that we are the majority. Our view that the separation of church and state is the best protection of all of our rights is not just the right position, it's also the popular one. But the popularity of our position, and any of our positions, and their righteousness, no longer seem to matter in some parts of this country, in certain states. And that's because our politics have become largely disconnected from policies. The fights that are happening in Washington, D.C., and in state houses all over the country, and in school board and city council meetings week after week, have very little to do with things like our tax rates, or how we're going to address housing prices, or if or where we should build new transit, or who has the best plan to expand access to health care. Instead, the fights that we see are about banning books, limiting and even criminalizing health care for LGBTQ people, especially our trans friends and loved ones, attacking the right to make our own decisions about whether or if to become parents and give birth, gutting our public education system. And increasingly, they are attacks on democracy itself. Given the interconnectedness of our nation and the nationalization of politics and the media, the influence of major political figures in our local news and culture, and the ease of finding our tribe online, it's probably no surprise that the fact is that our communities have become polarized and in some cases radicalized, neighbor against neighbor, community against community. But this threat isn't just limited to our communities locally either. As I told my colleagues at the World Humanist Congress in Copenhagen this past summer, American Christian nationalist organizations and extreme religious groups have found great success in exporting their beliefs and their bigotry into the political systems of other nations. It's an unfortunate fact that the failure of us to confront Christian nationalism and the rise of religious nationalism and its anti-democratic impulses means a corresponding rise in religious nationalism across the globe and democratic backsliding that puts all nations at risk. But before I dive in any further into the big structural problems, I want to bring things in a little closer, talk about myself, because that's what I love to do, right? That's a joke. I actually hate it. So I'll give you a little bit about my background. I came to this work, as many of us do, seeing my own rights taken away from me. So this was, I want you to think back to 2004, or if you're not old enough to think back to 2004, just imagine it. As anyone who, I was someone who paid far more attention to politics than any 18-year-old has any business doing. In 2004, I was very excited to have the opportunity to cast my first vote, my first ballot. For those who may not remember the specifics of American politics, 20 years ago, this was the re-election campaign of George W. Bush. The United States had just invaded Afghanistan and Iraq, and despite public opinion polling initially supporting both of those wars, President Bush's support was failing. In that election, campaigners for a middlingly popular president needed a way to shore up their support, especially among their evangelical base. And they made the decision that the best way to do that was to use the rights of LGBTQ people as a wedge issue to pull their voters out to the polls. Using recent Supreme Court decisions in Hawaii and Massachusetts, they painted a court-ordered expansion of marriage equality to include same-sex couples as an existential threat to the sanctity of marriage and the moral fabric of America. They talked about how marriage was a sacred institution, and the United States, with its early nascent movement toward secularization, was in danger of abandoning its so-called Christian heritage. They painted the extension of the institution of marriage to include gay and lesbian Americans as somehow cheapening the marriages of heterosexual couples. And perhaps most resonantly with evangelicals and reactionary Christians, they painted LGBTQ people as a threat to children. The echoes we hear from this previous use of religion to target LGBTQ people in today's moment of moral panic, particularly around trans people, are hard to ignore. But the mechanisms they used are different. In 2004, the bans on marriage equality were passed with huge majorities in all 11 states where they were on the ballot. It was a time when what some might call popular democracy was used to take away the rights of a vulnerable minority. In fact, it was the primary message they used to reinforce the righteousness of their cause. Who are these unelected judges to tell us, the Christian majority, that we have to recognize and celebrate sin, is what they would say. Those appeals to populism and a hostility to civil and human rights guardrails intended to protect the rights of vulnerable groups from the whims of the majority still resonate today with many. But the targets of those appeals to populism are no longer judges, but so-called cultural elites, woke corporations, teachers, librarians, doctors, universities. The system itself, they say, is captured by an entrenched deep state hostile to the beliefs and preferences of real Americans. And the language of their calls to action are often framed in explicitly religious terms, fights between good and evil. Every issue and policy fight a sort of end times battle that has to be waged by spiritual warriors.
This opportunity to share a piece of historical, theological information with you. It's a wonderful sermon I found in preparation of this talk by Samuel Davies. Samuel Davies was an early American Presbyterian minister, and he preached a sermon titled "The Curse of Cowardice" in 1758. This was during the French and Indian War, and Davies had moved back to Hanover, Virginia, and he was trying to rally the local militia to join in and fight with the British. At that time, they were still all British, against the French and against the Indians. And so this is an excerpt from the sermon he preached, so please listen because this is good. He says, "When in this corrupt, disordered state of things, where the lusts of men are perpetually embroiling the world with wars and fighting, and throwing all into confusion, when ambition and avarice would rob us of our property for which we have toiled, on which we subsist, when they would enslave the freeborn mind and compel us meanly to cringe to usurpation and arbitrary power, when they would tear from our eager grasp the most valuable blessing of heaven, I mean our religion, when they invade our country, formerly the region of tranquility, ravage our frontiers, butcher our fellow subjects, or confine them in barbarous captivity in the dens of savages, when our earthly all is ready to be seized by rapacious hands, and even our eternal all is in danger by the loss of our religion, When this is the case, what is then the will of God? Must peace then be maintained? Maintained with our perfidious and cruel invaders? Maintained at the expense of property, liberty, life, and everything dear and valuable? Maintained when it is in our power to vindicate our right and do ourselves justice? Is the work of peace then our only business? No. In such a time, even the God of peace proclaims by his providence to arms. And if we have ever lived in a point in time in American history since then that we could argue that now is the time to arms again, I think we are getting close.
To arms. That's William Wolfe. He is deeply connected to the White Christian Nationalist movement in America. He's a former Trump administration official who spent time with the Heritage Foundation's Heritage Action. Wolfe has called for the ending of sex education in schools, ending of surrogacy, and the ending of no-fault divorce throughout the country. He has said that, quote, Christians should reject a Christless conservatism and demand the political movement we are most closely associated with make a return to Christ-centered foundations, because it's either Christ or chaos, even on the right. And Wolfe is closely tied with the people pushing Project 2025, a $22 million plan backed by the Heritage Foundation with the backing of some of the most extreme proponents of the Christian nationalist ideology. On their agenda, ending Obergefell and ending marriage equality, a categorical nationwide ban on abortion, limiting access to IVF and contraception, banning pornography, and redefining anything that they find offensive as pornography to make it easier to ban. And just a few weeks ago, Wolfe spoke at The Sentinel, a far-right digital media outlet, to discuss Donald Trump's stance on abortion. During that discussion, Wolfe said, quote, I actually think there's wisdom in cloaking some of your power levels and maybe some of the things you're trying to do. And then, once you secure power, and you have it, you govern in a more extreme position, end quote. And so we've been talking about the threat posed by white Christian nationalist ideology for years now, and the media and politicians are finally waking up to it. They're seeing that white Christian nationalists aren't just conservatives who happen to be Christian or Christians who happen to be conservatives. Rather, it is a belief that one must adhere not just to Christianity, but a particular form of Christianity to be truly American, and that adherence to this brand of Christianity is the only way forward for all of us. It's a Christianity that is highly structured, advocates for so-called traditional gender roles and hierarchies, and that is intolerant of dissent and internal critique. It's a Christianity that values the accumulation of power for the sake of holding power.
Religion and Christianity are the biggest things missing from this country, and I truly believe that we need to bring them back, and we have to bring them back fast. I think it's one of the biggest problems we have. That's why our country is going haywire. We've lost religion in our country. All Americans need a Bible in their home, and I have many. It's my favorite book. It's a lot of people's favorite book. This Bible is a reminder that the biggest thing we have to bring back America and to make America great again is our religion. Religion is so important. It's so missing, but it's going to come back, and it's going to come back strong, just like our country is going to come back strong. In the end, we do not answer to bureaucrats in Washington. We answer to God in heaven. Christians are under siege. We must protect content that is pro-God. We love God, and we have to protect anything that is pro-God. We must defend God in the public square and not allow the media or the left-wing groups to silence, censor, or discriminate against us. We have to bring Christianity back into our lives and back into what will be again a great nation. Our founding fathers did a tremendous thing when they built America on Judeo-Christian values. Now that foundation is under attack, perhaps as never before. What can we do? Stand up, speak out, and pray that God will bless America again. I'm proud to endorse and encourage you to get this Bible. We must make America pray again. Pray, get educated, get motivated, and stand with me and the legions of Americans asking God to bless our great nation, to bring our great nation back, and to make America great again.
It's also a very convenient way to pay your legal bills, $60 at a time. So we'll just point that out. White Christian nationalism, we laugh about this, but listen to the actual words that were being said there. We don't answer to bureaucrats, we answer to God alone. We don't answer to voters, we answer to God alone. That's the implication there. White Christian nationalism is an ideology that is hostile to any form of multicultural, multiracial, and multi-faith pluralism. It holds that all those hierarchies I mentioned have to be preserved, that immigrants must assimilate to a particular vision of Americanness without lending any of their own cultural context to our nation, that Black, Hispanic, and Asian Americans, especially if they aren't evangelical Christians, are inherently second-class citizens and can never be truly American. As scholars on white Christian nationalism, Samuel Perry and Philip Gorski wrote in their recent book, The Flag and the Cross, a distinguishing feature of the political expression of white Christian nationalism is what they refer to as the Holy Trinity, that is, freedom, order, and violence. The freedom they're talking about is a libertarian sort of freedom for people like us being above all else, straight, white, native-born Christian men. Order is what is to be imposed upon everyone else. And that means preserving racial and gender order among all other things. And the violence is a righteous violence directed at anyone who would violate that order. This is the sort of political theology that uses Christian narratives and symbolism to great effect. And crucially, it's antithetical to our understanding of democracy and our values as atheists and humanists. Rather than attempting to convince voters that their positions are the right one, Christian nationalism has its own version of the elect. Again, meaning those chosen by God to rule.
And so we're saying now that we essentially have globo-homo nationalism, what does it look like for us to sort of re-pour the foundations of a free society in America? God is not God of just your heart. God is God of the public square. And I would say that even if a judge or a dog catcher or a president is not a Christian, what they need to recognize most fundamentally is that all authority in God's creation is derivative from the Creator. And he tells everybody in authority how they should use it, whether they have repented of their sins and believed in Jesus Christ and accepted the gospel or not. They will be held accountable. And so our call as Christian nationalists is twofold. Yes, we want more unapologetic Christians leading in the public square as Christians, but we're calling on all leaders who exercise authority, whether they're Christian or not, to recognize that they will answer to the one supreme authority, and they need to learn how to exercise that authority rightly according to his good commands and precepts today.
Only the elect, that's William Wolfe again, those who believe they're only accountable to their supreme authority. And only those elect should control the political process, lest people who are not like them gain access to power. Those others, they believe, must be closely scrutinized, discouraged, and even denied access to the political process. Supporters of this ideology are fundamentally a threat to pluralistic secular democracy, period. Survey after survey has found that those folks are far less likely to say we should make it easier for people to vote. They're far more likely to support racial and political gerrymandering, and they're far more likely to have supported attempts to overturn the 2020 election through violence. And while the Christian nationalist ideology is ascendant in parts of American politics, it was dangerously close to winning in my home state of Pennsylvania and in Arizona's gubernatorial race in 2022, we can't pretend that it's some recent development. To summarize sociologist Andrew Whitehead, Christian nationalism and anti-democratic attitudes have a long history in America. After the American Civil War in the 1860s, through the years of Jim Crow and into the Civil Rights era and beyond, white Christian nationalist leaders provided the theological justification to rationalize limiting Black Americans' access to participation in the democratic process. They explicitly tied these efforts to their desire to protect the purity of a Christian nation. And these have not been and are not now simply policy disagreements about the specifics of what information you need to vote. These are explicit attempts to limit voter access, ranging from administrative barriers to threats of political violence threatening our democracy. The anti-democratic goals and actions are not hidden from public view or only whispered about in back rooms. In a 1980 speech to a group of evangelical leaders, Paul Weyrich, who was the co-founder of the Christian nationalist group Moral Majority, said this, quote, "Now many of our Christians have what I call goo-goo syndrome, good government. They want everybody to vote. I don't want everybody to vote. Elections have never been won by a majority of people. They have never been from the beginning of our country, and they are not now. As a matter of fact, our leverage in the elections quite candidly goes up as the voting populace goes down." End quote. For decades, Christian nationalists have focused on gaining and maintaining power, and they've been aware that a democracy with free and fair elections threatens their ability to maintain their privileged access to political power. Their response has been obvious and consistent: make it difficult or impossible for the political opposition to vote. Weyrich and Jerry Falwell and their allies created organizations from the ground up to enact those policies, and many of those organizations still exist today, barely a step removed from their explicitly racist and theocratic origin, supporting restrictive voter policies that disproportionately and intentionally affect people of color, including strict voter ID laws, automatic removal from voter registration lists, or limiting the number of polling places, especially in urban cores of cities. And having successfully usurped our democracy using those means, they've now pivoted to a new strategy: demonizing LGBTQ people, criminalizing abortion, and attacking public education. The ultimate goal of these folks, and the place where we live now, the policymaking world that we live in today, especially here in Texas, is what we see. Their goal was to enact laws that put the lives of LGBTQ people under threat. One piece of legislation they pointed to as a model for future action was a 2016 Mississippi law that would have allowed private businesses and, yes, government employees to discriminate against LGBTQ people primarily, provided that they did so in accordance with their sincerely held religious beliefs. The bill offered extraordinary protections, not just to religious beliefs per se, but to a very narrow set of beliefs most closely associated with their ideology. If you hold a different set of religious beliefs, say like a commitment to gender equality or LGBTQ equality or abortion access, there is no liberty in this bill for you. So why have I spent so long focusing on the historic successes and backgrounds of this anti-democratic, anti-humanist, and anti-pluralistic movement in our nation? Because ultimately, the groups advancing this agenda are not satisfied with the successes they've already won. Instead, they're looking at how to roll back our rights and our progress even further, using tens and indeed hundreds of millions of dollars. They've already entrenched a sympathetic majority of judges on our federal bench and solidified a Christian nationalist majority on the Supreme Court for decades to come. They've poured piles of money into astroturfed groups aimed at empowering extremists in our own backyards. They know that their ideology is deeply unpopular and opposed by the overwhelming majority of Americans. They know that they are losing and that their time of privilege and wielding power is coming to an end. But if they can use that last little bit of power that they have to enact anti-democratic policies that insulate them from electoral accountability, they can maintain their power for just a bit longer. And in the meantime, the most vulnerable among us will pay the price. ProPublica recently released a story exposing the ideology that motivates Leonard Leo, a man behind the decade-long campaign to remake our nation's federal judiciary. From that piece, quote, "Having reshaped the courts, Leo now has grander ambitions. Today he sees a nation plagued with ills: wokeism in education, one-sided journalism, and ideas like environmental, social, and governance, or ESG policies, sweeping corporate America. A member of the Roman Catholic Church, he intends to wage a broader culture war against a, quote, progressive Ku Klux Klan, and vile and immoral current-day barbarians, secularists, and bigots," I think he's talking about us, "who demonize people of faith and move society further from its natural order. And Leo has a $1.6 billion, billion with a B, war chest to enact this plan. That money was supplied by one man, a 90-year-old manufacturing magnate who donated an entire company to enact this agenda. Leo has used that money to strengthen ties to the Christian nationalist movement, donating tens of millions of dollars to groups like the Heritage Foundation and Federalist Society. What's more, Leo and his supporters are now explicitly advocating for the public funding of a Catholic school in Oklahoma, teeing up a case at the Supreme Court that threatens to destroy our nation's most important innovation, or one of them, a secular public education that's available to all. Last year, Moms for Liberty, the so-called parents' rights group, held their annual conference just steps away from where our conference was in Philadelphia. They endorsed hundreds of candidates at the school board level, state legislature, city councils. About half of their preferred candidates won. And in those school districts, towns, and states that they targeted, they got to work. Despite protestations that they weren't banning books, they weren't threatening LGBTQ people who happened to mention their spouse as a public school teacher, they did exactly that. A report released earlier this year by PEN America found that Pennsylvania, along with North Dakota, South Carolina, and Florida, were the primary targets of book bans at the school district level. They removed books by Toni Morrison and Kurt Vonnegut, and even a poem written by Amanda Gorman that was read at Joe Biden's presidential inauguration in 2021. In Alabama, they flagged for removal a book called Read Me a Story, Stella, about a girl teaching her younger brother to read, as potentially explicit. Why? Because the author's last name was gay. According to the Miami Herald, in the more than 150 school districts that banned books in the 2022-2023 school year, the vast majority, 80%, had a chapter or local affiliate of one of three groups that have been instrumental in pushing these bans: Moms for Liberty, Citizens Defending Freedom, and Parents' Rights in Education. They've passed sweeping and intentionally vague laws intended to chill speech and criminalize conduct that they view as immoral. They've declared drag of any sort inherently obscene. These laws are often so broad that they would classify a trans person giving this talk on this stage in front of all of you as drag, putting trans people at risk of criminal prosecution simply for speaking out. They've sought to weaponize the power of government against people who they believe have no place in society. And in typical authoritarian fashion, they engage in the biggest show of projection imaginable, claiming to be the real victims of government weaponization.
How political opponents to those in power are dealt with in third world dictatorships, banana republics, and communist regimes? Well, it's simple. The people in power use their police agencies to arrest their opponents for made-up crimes in an attempt to discredit them, bankrupt them, imprison them, exile them, or all of the above. And if you're not paying attention, you may not realize that Joe Biden is using exactly those tactics to make sure that Donald Trump is not his opponent in 2024. Here's the problem. If these tactics end up working to keep Trump from winning or even running in 2024, it is going to be the last American election that will be decided by ballots rather than bullets.
The last election to be decided by ballots rather than bullets. Our opponents know the power of these ostensibly local groups and these appeals to popular backlash. They understand that the illusion of popular support is key to their successes. These astroturfed groups can pop up quickly and launder the billion-dollar slush fund that Leonard Leo has to give the appearance of any sort of popularity. But it's nothing of the sort. An analysis by the Washington Post found that just 11 people were responsible for 60% of book bans nationwide in 2023. And so what's the answer to this assault on our public schools, on our LGBTQ friends and loved ones, on abortion access, and on democracy itself? How can we possibly fight back against a movement that has billions of dollars, a network of obsessive extremists, and the support of many churches and religious leaders dotted throughout this country? The answer is right here in front of us. It's here today, and it's what we at American Atheists are committed to supporting at the grassroots level as part of our strategic plan over the coming years. I'm sorry to say that American Atheists, unfortunately, and our broader non-religious movement, or our civil rights allies, don't have any eccentric billionaires who have donated $1.6 billion to help us remake American culture. But if you know anyone, please let me know. But we have a resource that Leonard Leo and his ilk don't. We have real people all across the country who recognize the threat of religious demagoguery, who have a thriving, vibrant, diverse community that is standing up against extremism and building bridges to other people of conscience who share our values. By unapologetically living those values out loud in public in our hometowns, we are showing that the scaremongering and the bigotry of white Christian nationalists simply doesn't hold water. We're showing our neighbors that claims by religious leaders about how secularization will lead to the downfall of society might just be a bit overstated. We're demonstrating that an inclusive, pluralistic vision of American values is the only way for a nation of almost 350 million people to survive and indeed thrive. And we're finding allies and partners who share our vision and our values. This past November, Karen Smith, an incumbent member of the Central Bucks School District Board of Education, won re-election, and she was selected as the new school board president. At her swearing in, Smith chose to take her oath of office on a stack of banned and challenged books. She said, "I'm not particularly religious. The Bible doesn't hold any significant meaning to me, and given everything that's occurred over the last couple years, the banned books, they do mean something to me at this point." And so I suppose I should close on some sort of hopeful note, and maybe if hopeful, we'll call it optimistic or purposeful. It's our obligation as humanists and atheists and community leaders and Americans committed to democracy to properly frame the existential threat that white Christian nationalist ideology poses to a functioning society. Their belief in the supremacy of religion over non-religion, of one particular religion over all others, strikes at the very heart, the very foundational beliefs of our movement and universal human rights. This struggle is not humanists against Christians or progressives against conservatives, white against black, gay against straight. It's a struggle against an exclusionary, divisive, and dangerous ideology against all who would dare question it. So it's incumbent upon us to speak out forcefully against the cruel and dehumanizing rhetoric and policies of the Christian nationalist movement, to build bridges to people who share our vision for a pluralistic society, where all people have the freedom to believe or not believe as they see fit, to fight, potentially literally, to protect the safety and human dignity of all people, but especially our LGBTQ friends and loved ones, people who need access to abortion care, immigrants, and others. And it's vital that we push back against our fellow atheists who are out of step with our values and seemingly content to carry water for Christian nationalist extremists. And that's the work that can only be done by a genuinely people-powered, grassroots-led movement like this. The profound threats to our democracy and the broader examples of democratic backsliding we see globally are enabled by this campaign of dehumanization being waged against disfavored minority groups. After all, it's far easier for Christian nationalists and their enablers to justify extreme actions when they believe that their children are under attack or their core being is being threatened. And to be crystal clear, this is not going to end with mere obstacles to voting or book bans or restrictions on drag shows. Violence against disfavored groups is on their agenda, and it's already happening. Government officials in some states are demanding lists of patients who have received medical care related to gender transition or abortion. Parents right here in Texas are being threatened with the removal of their children. The Attorney General is demanding that PFLAG chapters turn over their membership records to the state. We've seen mass shootings motivated by white Christian nationalism targeting Jews at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pennsylvania, black Christian worshipers in Charlottesville, and black shoppers in Buffalo, New York. We've seen religious and ethno-nationalism used as justification for shootings and violence, not just in the United States, but in Norway, New Zealand, and India. This violence and the rhetoric that enables it must be forcibly condemned. Groups within our community with the resources to engage in advocacy must act now to build support for that grassroots advocacy and community building, to promote engagement in civic culture, and to work to strengthen democratic guardrails that protect universal human rights and promote pluralism and mutual respect. Abroad, opportunists see the appeal of ethno-religious nationalist rhetoric and policies as potent political tools. The parallels between the American white Christian nationalist movement and those in Hungary and even France, or the Hinduva movement in India, are hard to ignore. We can work to build coalitions with other faith groups and belief groups, collaborate where we find common ground, and ensure that we're communicating about this threat strategically and in a way that promotes understanding rather than alienating potential allies. We have to be thoughtful and compassionate in our criticisms and our rhetoric, and not play into or allow ourselves to be used as tools for xenophobes, reactionaries, or bigots. And while it's true that the courts have long been a tool for us in the United States to vindicate our rights and protect the most vulnerable, yes, even here in Texas, we can no longer rely on them as good faith arbiters of the law or protectors of human rights and human dignity. They've been taken over and packed by the very same ideologues we are now forced to confront. Instead, we have to commit ourselves to making our arguments gasp in the court of public opinion, getting our hands dirty in the political process, showing the harms that come from privileging any one religion over others or from allowing the powers of the state to be wielded against dissenters. And we have to do so without appealing to the base populist instincts of division and blame that so many politicians turn to. There are more than 95,000 school board members elected all across this country. 7,000 state legislators, almost 500,000 total elected officials in the United States. Running for office, engaging in the difficult work of the political process, expanding access to voting, supporting candidates who share our values, demonstrates our commitment to democracy and puts us in stark contrast to our opponents. Any one of the people in this room could be the next Karen Smith, being sworn in on a stack of banned books. Or you could be the person who runs her campaign, or who phone banks for her, or who sends out postcards. Or you could be the person who convinces that person to run in the first place. Or you could be the deciding vote in her election. This is not, and I would never pretend that this is an easy path to follow. There is no cosmic force bending the moral arc of our universe toward justice. Instead, the slow, steady march of progress only continues because advocates like you and like us and the communities like ours unapologetically insist that our humanist, atheist values, our commitment to bold, people-centered, and inclusive democracy are the best way to protect rights for us all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nick, I think. You know, intellectually, I know about Christian nationalism, but it is really jarring to hear them speak, right? Like, I almost feel like I need to go take a shower. So, we're going to take about a 10-minute break right now so that everybody can kind of get their Zen going again. And think about some questions that you would like to ask Nick when we resume. And then we'll have our question and answer and then go on with the rest of our program. So, 10 minutes, y'all.
That's great, Nick. Thank you.
Rockets, moonshine, spend it on the half-life. Money, we make it. Before we see it, you take it. Oh, make one high, throw up both my hands. Yes, make one high, throw up both my hands. Listen, baby. To increase finance, bills pile up sky high. Why you send that boy off to die? Oh, make me wanna holler, throw up both my hands. Yes, make me wanna holler, throw up both my hands. Nah, nah. Trigger happy, boy, we see. Panic is spreading. Only God knows where we're headed. Oh, make me wanna holler the way they do my life. Yes, make me wanna holler the way they do my life. Oh, make me wanna holler, throw up both my hands. Oh, make me wanna
Okay, folks, everybody take a seat.
Test.
Okay.
Somebody needs one, if they'll raise their hand, there's a few extra here and there.
All right. Okay. Are we all ready to get going again? So Nick's talk reminded me of something. He's probably surprised to hear this. We actually have an election going on right now. I know, right? It's like, what, the end of April? It's just crazy. So May 5th, I think, we have early, May 4th, sorry. We have early voting going on right now. But I'm going to have Will come up real quick and just remind y'all what that election is about, because it's one of these really funky small ones that not... It's new. Yeah, and it's new. It's not intuitively obvious. So anyway, Will.
I can do it in 60 seconds. So to tie in with what Nick said, it's not all doom and gloom. We all can do something about this. And she's right, there are 2 elections in May, a special election on May 4th and a runoff election on May 28th. They're both separate. They both have early voting beforehand. Early voting for the special election is on now through April 30th. And then election day is May 4th on the Saturday. Houston Oasis is a 501c3. We don't get into electioneering. But that's why I formed a separate group called Secular Houston, which has nothing to do with Houston Oasis. Secular Houston shows you where to focus your energy, who to vote for, and so that way we can make our voice heard, our meaning separation of church and state, secular people, atheists, non-believers. So Secular Houston can show you who to vote for. We understand, hey, you don't have the time to research jobs, kids, all that stuff. We get it. We do the work for you, show you where to focus your energy to make Houston and Texas a less crappy place, as we just heard of. So, again, just a reminder, May 4th and May 28th, circle in the calendars. There's early voting beforehand. Thank you. What are we voting for, real quick? Who, what? What? So, May 4th is a special election. The reason it's special and the surprise is a whole other topic. But May 4th is a special election we're voting for. It's called HCAD, H-C-A-D, Harris Central Appraisal District. No, it's a central, not county. So HCAD, if you live in Harris County, there are 3 HCAD positions. There's like 3 or 4 people in each one. Who do I vote for? Secular Houston will show you who to vote for in those elections. And the May 28th is runoff elections. The primaries that happened back in April, there were some elections that no one got a majority, so there were about 6 runoff elections on May 28th. That's it. That's where you're voting for. Thank you.
Every little itty-bitty election we need to show up for. Also want to encourage people to view this talk. Well, this talk will be on YouTube, on our YouTube channel, I believe. And view it, share it on your social media to friends or people that you think might be, you know, just as jarred by some of the things we heard. So that's a way to get the word out. You know, we are so siloed. Like, I didn't get my invitation to those talks. So, you know, like I said, I know they go on, but you just don't realize what's out there until you actually hear it. So I think it's a good idea to share, to let people know. So we're going to start with question and answer now. Tim Sledge is going to go around with a microphone to so that everybody can hear your question, and we'll have Nick come up and answer questions.
Thank you. Thanks for your talk. It was scary, intentionally, obviously. I have a problem with something you said a few minutes before the end of your talk.
Sure.
I estimate 7 minutes, whatever.
Okay.
Scary. You got us good and worked up. And then you said, we have to be prepared to fight literally if necessary. And I have a big problem with your encouraging us that way. You told us this talk was about our role in opposing this movement.
Yep.
And I have a big problem with your standing up there and telling us we need to be prepared to fight, literally if necessary.
Okay. So let me explain what I mean by that. I don't mean meeting violence with violence. I mean being willing to put our bodies on the line. Being willing occasionally to, yes, have violence used against us. Whether that means obstructing people that are trying to do violence upon our LGBTQ friends and loved ones, whether that means civil disobedience and being willing to be arrested. That's what I mean by fighting, literally. I don't mean us cloistering ourselves in rooms and giving good speeches. I mean being out there, pardon the expression, in the trenches. I mean being out there confronting this in person. That's what I mean by fighting. I don't mean going into churches and cracking skulls, to be clear, and I would never suggest that. But what I'm suggesting is that, yes, it isn't enough for us just to talk about this. We have to be willing to act, and we have to be, yes, willing to put our bodies on the line sometimes. And that's what every civil rights movement has meant. It's meant going out, and I don't want to draw the direct parallel to the civil rights movement because that's an inappropriate parallel, but people, our opponents are willing to use violence against us.
You just said in the trenches.
Mm-hmm.
People in the trenches have got guns.
It's a metaphor. I'm being metaphorical. Sure. Sure. Well, it's a metaphor, but I mean, I am being somewhat literal. I don't mean fisticuffs, but I do mean, again, being willing to put our bodies on the line. And maybe that's a better way of putting it. But in the sake of, yes, shocking people into saying, oh, what does he mean by that? I'm happy you asked the question. But I do mean, quite literally, that it is important for us to be willing to be out there in public, willing to confront this, stand shoulder to shoulder, literally, with people, if you're able to.
Nick, we have another question from back in the back.
Sure.
I think it was Wolf. You mentioned one of his positions is being against no-fault divorce.
Correct.
That is extremely common among Christian nationalists.
Yes.
Why?
I mean, traditional gender roles, right? Like the part of their ideology is this idea that women should be subservient, that men should rule the house, that men should be sort of like the hierarchy of wife, husband, pastor, God, right? That's the appropriate hierarchy of things. And so allowing women the ability, or couples the ability, to dissolve a marriage and empowering women in just this moderate way of, well, you don't have to have a cheat, you don't have to cheat on somebody, whatever, you can just get divorced because it didn't work. They view that as like a threat to the family. And it goes back to that weaponization of religion in those sort of hierarchy structures of, that, well, this is a promise before God and deal with it, basically. And so they view it as a threat, again, to the fabric of American society if people can control their own destinies in any way. So.
We have a question from Charles here up at the front.
Thank you, Nick. Very good talk. Thank you. Is this coming through?
Yeah, you're good.
Yeah. One thing that's baffled me, and I have studied as a gay person, I'm hyper aware of Christian nationalism. Yep. But what confuses me is that the three most conservative members of the Supreme Court are Catholic, as I understand. Where do Catholics fit in all this?
Yeah. So it's interesting. There's been a lot of thinking and studying about the role that different religious education plays in sort of the theological or the legal underpinning of this movement. So a lot of the theology comes from people that went to Bible college or whatever, but a lot of the legal side comes from people with Catholic educations. And so it's not just three. You know, Amy Coney Barrett is famously Catholic. John Roberts is Catholic. Sam Alito is Catholic. Scalia was Catholic. Gorsuch is like Catholic / Episcopalian, like he kind of did both. Kavanaugh, I don't think they really know, but he went to a Catholic church as well. Who am I missing? I'm missing one more. But like they all have like Catholic connections. And it's just very odd. And there's a, if you look at the Catholic or the conservative Christian nationalist legal movement, a lot of it comes from Catholic education because there's like, I hate to put it this way, but there's like an intellectual rigor around like Catholic doctrine and dogma. Like there's this whole like corpus of research and study and history that goes on where, you know, well, right. And so that's a lot of it. But, you know, those folks view a lot of white evangelicals as, you know, loyal foot soldiers in the quest for, you know, Catholic integralism, which is really scary as well. So same idea, though. Catholic integralism is the idea of, well, there should be a Catholic integration with the state and the church between the two, and that Catholic doctrine should trump our Constitution. Same ultimate goal. And it's funny, they sort of elide these differences, right? It's like, well, which Bible do you mean? It's like, whatever. We mean the Bible. Like, okay, you know, which Christianity do you mean? Well, we just mean Christianity. And they just sort of gloss over that in interest of protecting power, and they'll sort of figure it out later, is kind of the annoying answer to that. They don't care that much, because it's about power. It's not about the actual theology.
All right, next question.
When I was in high school, the most conservative of preachers would not allow an American flag in their church because they were supposed to keep the message of God pure.
Yep.
In the last couple of weeks, at least on YouTube, I've noticed that there's a couple of preachers that are sort of going back to that. Have you noticed any movement towards that?
Yeah, you know, it's the point you bring up is really important, that what we've heard from a lot of folks who've left sort of high control religions, really conservative congregations over the years is like, oh yeah, it just occurred to me that there was always an American flag as well on the dais, like on the altar area, and that's really weird. It never occurred to me. I haven't seen the backlash that you're talking about, where people would say, ooh, yeah, because again, a lot of them see sort of the political, like how good it is to be in charge politically, and the challenge is that it comes across really disingenuous. If somebody like me gets up there and is like, how are you allowing the purity of God's message to be, you know, usurped by the political message? It really comes across as, you know, maybe who are you, atheists? Shut up. You know, they don't. I'm not the right messenger for that. There are, however, a lot of religious folks that are kind of standing up and saying, listen, this really is a corruption of our message. We don't want to do this. The thing that we always have to remind folks or encourage is drawing the distinction between and being really careful about how they say it. Don't say this is not real Christianity, because it unquestionably is. But rather, this is not my understanding of Christianity, and there's an important distinction between those two things, where, you know, I don't think anyone would question the sincerity of, you know, Mike Pence or Mike Pompeo's genuine belief in what they say and how it's justified by religion, or Bill Barr. They absolutely believe this stuff, and so it's not fake Christianity. It's not, you know, it's not made up. It's not blasphemy. It's, you know, it's a version of Christianity. It's not. The majority of Americans don't share that belief or don't share that Christian outlook, but it's important to draw that distinction between my understanding of Christianity as a progressive Christian, if the person's a progressive Christian, and quote-unquote true Christianity, because that presumes that there's some objective truth, and that's a whole other topic of conversation that we won't get into, but yeah. So.
All right, we have a question from Richard here on the front.
Yeah. Hi, Richard.
Hi, thanks for the great talk. I wanted to add a little piece of history which helps explain, I think, the Catholic Supreme Court justice question. Why did presidents keep appointing Catholics? And that had to do in part with, you know, over the years, conservative justices sometimes become less conservative when they're on the bench. It takes a long time and doesn't happen often enough. But a conservative Catholic who is under mandates from, you know, previously conservative popes and that kind of thing, they were viewed, even by evangelicals frequently in the political sector, as being more reliably, permanently conservative and opposed to abortion and other things like that, and gay rights. You know, so they were viewed as somebody who would reliably stay conservative. The CIA, for the same reason, favored Catholics and Mormons as CIA agents. They were less likely to, quote, go native, unquote.
Interesting. Oh, yeah. Thanks, Richard.
Mrs. Garrett.
Hi. I would say over the past 20 years or so, I've seen kind of like religious fundamentalism kind of lessen and lessen in my own like personal life with the people I work with and friends and all of that. Religion has played like less and less of a role over that time.
Yep.
But at that same time, this sort of extremism has like risen and risen. Is that a symptom of kind of this sort of ideology being in its death throes? Like hopefully like we're almost close to it being over and we just need to get past this hump?
Yeah, so it's one of the things I mentioned in that was the sort of sorting that's going on, the fact that groups are becoming more extreme. And so what's happening, I think, often, especially in like mainline Protestant groups, is people look at the corruption, they look at the hypocrisy of Catholic Church, of other religious groups, of the Southern Baptist Convention, and the people that aren't like, quote unquote, true believers, the people that aren't like deeply committed, are just like, this is terrible, I don't want anything part of this, and it leaves behind some of the sort of moderating forces of the church. And the churches are becoming less a place for people to have dialogue, to meet with people who are different from them, and sort of, again, moderating their position, getting to know people who are different from them, whether that's, from different racial backgrounds, different ethnic backgrounds, different, economic backgrounds, different upbringing, whatever. Churches for a long time were that type of gathering, and that because they've become so political, they've become so caught up on one or two issues, right, on abortion, your position on abortion, your position on one candidate, it pushed away a lot of people. And so it's just the true believers who are left. And so the numbers, the absolute numbers of those folks are shrinking. And we see an increase in the secularization, especially of young people. And part of that is also a suspicion of all institutions. There's this detachment from so many institutions out there, not just religious, but government, civic, and so on, that they look at it and go, these groups are not meeting my needs. These groups are, again, full of hypocrisy. They're full of leaders who are looking only after themselves, people who, have contempt for me, who don't understand my own struggles. And so they detach from it. And so that's this big group of none of the above that we see. So there's like 10% of people, 10, 11%, who are atheist agnostic, and then there's like another 20% or so-ish who are none of the above. Atheists and agnostics are super engaged civically. So there's this myth of like atheists are not engaged, that atheists don't vote, atheists don't turn out. Atheists are the single most likely religious demographic to vote in an election, volunteer in an election, donate money to candidates, and so on. Even more so than white evangelicals, about twice as likely. But it's the none of the above group, the people who are just like, I don't think about this at all, I don't care about this at all. Those are the people who are just like, I don't show up, I don't care, I'm so disillusioned with all of this. So what you're seeing in your personal life will be more of those people, because there's just more of them. But also you're seeing more extremism from the people that are left behind, because there's this feedback loop. There's a self-reinforcing. There's this, sort of selection bias where those are the voices they hear, and so that, it makes sense. It feels really good to have your priors confirmed and to be told you are a, special, beautiful, unique person in government, and you alone have, some special access to power. That feels great, and so people really that stuck around really keep up with that. So, is it in its death throes? I don't know. I also don't know that it matters, because they're, again, insulating themselves from democratic accountability. One last thing, and then we'll go to the next question. I saw a figure that said that I think it was the next 20 years, something like that. 70% of people will live in, I think it was 10 or 15 states. 70% of Americans will live in 15 states. So you have 15 states, 30 senators. The remainder of our population will have 70 senators, and those remaining 35 states will be, on average, will be whiter, more Christian, more conservative, and they'll have a veto-proof, the impeachment-proof majority in the Senate. If you have 70 people in the Senate, 70 is a lot. So that's really scary, and it sort of paints a really grim picture of the future of a pluralistic secular democracy when the democratic representation that we have in our government is so distorted. I think that's a really scary place to go, especially if it's so out of step with what people see as the majority of Americans. I think that's really dangerous.
Okay, our last question is from Josh.
Hi, Josh.
Hey, how you doing? Nice talk. Hey, so I have a big problem with something you said as well towards the end there.
Sure.
You say we should make common cause with other faiths. I don't think there's any debate that Islam is a far greater threat to life, liberty, religious, personal rights. The worst Christian nationalist, you know, we're talking about taking away abortion rights or the right to marry same sex. But Islamists would murder you for being gay and murder me for being an atheist.
Well,
and
so
defend it religiously.
I'll draw the distinction between Islamism and Islam. American Muslims are more likely to support abortion access, more likely to support church-state separation, more likely to support same-sex marriage than American white evangelicals. And so there's I mean, you're shaking your head. Those are the facts. That's the polling. And so there's big differences between people's personal experience with religion, and I don't want to pretend for a moment that folks who are ex-Muslims have an easy row to hoe. It's really difficult to leave a Muslim community. It's really challenging, even a pretty progressive Muslim community in the U.S. But we have to understand that no religion is a monolith. there's no Pope of Islam. And so the day-to-day expression of Islam in the U.S. is very different from the day-to-day expression in one community versus another community versus another community. It's very different from the expression of Islamism or the political expression of Islam, which is sort of akin to Christian nationalism. Those are different from Islam. We have really great allies who fight really hard to protect church-state separation, who care very deeply about it in the U.S., who are themselves Muslims or Sikh or Buddhist or Hindu. It's when there's a political overlap, when there's a fusion between policy and politics, between that religious ideology with nationalism, with ethno-nationalism, that's where there becomes a really grave threat. And so I will challenge you to certainly look at the polling, and my figures may be slightly out of date, but the last time I checked, and this was a couple years ago, those were the facts. And so I don't want to paint any one religion with too broad of a brush. I will say, obviously, I think I'm right about the religious question, but I think that profound threats to democracy require us to build bridges and build coalitions and not leave anybody on the outside who cares about that. And the way they can demonstrate they care about it is through their actions. And so whatever they do on Saturday or Sunday, we can save that for another day. We can have that discourse later. But what I'm really concerned about is a group that has 29% of the American people in their pocket, that has 6 out of 3 Supreme Court justices, that has a political candidate lining up to support them, So I don't want to pretend for a moment that there's one answer to this or that this is an easy question. And I understand that a lot of people, especially people in our community, have suffered very deep harm at the hands of a lot of religious communities, including Muslim communities in the U.S. So ex-Muslims have a very unique view on things and have often gone through a lot of trauma, but not everybody. And whatever. So we have to find allies where we can and build bridges, but less than 1% of Americans are Muslims. And so pretending that it's a unique threat to the U.S. right now, I think is myopic and not in line with reality.
Thank you, Nick. As Jennifer comes to give us our closing words, let's show Nick our appreciation one more time.
Thank you very much. Good questions, y'all. So I have a few announcements. One is that y'all should see little surveys on the chairs or they got passed out to you. So it would really help us if you would fill those out. There's a little plastic box at the back on the table back there. You can drop those in whenever you've finished. Tim Sledge will be happy to give you a survey if you don't have one. If you need a little writing instrument, he's probably got some pencils or something too. The next one is that our whole group is run pretty much on volunteers. And we have folks that come every Sunday morning and bring the coffee stuff and make the coffee. And occasionally they want to go out of town or, have a relative to take care of or whatever. So we need more coffee maker people. And next Sunday would be a great opportunity for Ted Andrews to teach you how to make coffee in our coffee maker. So if you are interested, Ted, would you stand up so everybody can see who you are? Go see Ted if you are interested in helping us make coffee. I'm not sure if he's the one that wants to go out of town or not, but. Right, yeah. So one of you early risers, or two of you early risers that wouldn't mind getting here early to help us with that. I want to go real quickly, remind y'all that we are kind of in the middle of our secular week of action. We had some events yesterday. We have some events coming up. Please go to the Houston Oasis website, to our social media sites, to get details about other things that are coming up. We do have a blood drive that's going on. Houston Oasis has a code, so if you go to any blood center and give blood, you can use that code, and we'll be credited for that volunteer donation. We have a homeless outreach that we've got a little box out in the back, out here, a white box. So if you have any donations for that, and there's a list on the top of it that says the things that we're accepting. We have a food bank that coming up. Right. So there's a food bank shift coming up. So again, check the website to keep up to date with all of our activities. And now it's time to talk about money. So as I said before, we are mainly a volunteer organization. Mainly because it costs money to pay people to do stuff. So we do pay, but we do pay for things. We pay for this, to rent this room and our childcare room every week. We pay for the rental, the storage unit that we store all of our sound equipment in, and we have volunteers that schlep that every week to this location. So, so we really need financial support. We also pay our child care person, we pay musicians, we pay some speakers. So the more that you can give financially or in kind helps us tremendously. We have a hat at the back where you can drop a donation. Tim Wise is our treasurer, and he'll be happy to sign you up to do a recurring donation if you want to do that. So please give what you can. And if you can't give, we're just happy to see you here. So again, we need the help. Talk to Tim. Tim Wise. We have lots of Tims. Tim Wise is the guy you need to talk to about that. Okay, let's see. We have something to celebrate this week. Jacob Atchison is now officially a licensed professional counselor. He got his license. Yay! Does anybody else have anything that they are celebrating, anything that they have a concern about that you would like to share with the group? Jahan, stand up. Let's hear it.
I'm so excited. I get to be a voting delegate at the state national convention in El Paso in June.
Wow. All right, thank you for representing. Also, if you have any, also I want to remind y'all that if you have any concerns, if you have a problem going on that you need to talk to a member of our care team about, please feel free to reach out. You can reach out to care@HoustonOasis.org privately if you have something that you need to let us know about privately. Okay, so we're getting ready to have lunch. Nick, are you going to stay for lunch? Oh, great. So Nick will be here if y'all want to continue the conversation with him. We will need help rearranging the chairs and putting out the tables. So if some of y'all can help with that, that will help us out a lot. And as we put some up, and then we'll leave some out for the tables. And then we'll also, if you have food, we'll need to, of course, bring that out and set it up. So thank you all so much for being here. Richard, did you have something?
Yeah, for the potluck, it's also called a bring your own lunch. But if you didn't bring your own lunch, don't worry about it. There will be food. I think we typically order pizza. So you won't starve to death.
Yes. All right. So thank y'all for coming.
I was handing out the pencils for the survey card. Tim needs the pencil box back. I'm not sure where I put it. So if you see the pencil box, please give it to Tim.
All right. Thank y'all. All right. Have a good lunch.